Hi there. When Stefan Euler talks about depth psychology, I think he means something along the lines of an analysis of the psychological map of human consciousness. So really, it's analytical psychology is the term he's looking for, I think, when he talks about depth psychology. But it's also there is a psychological aspect to Gnosis, as we've discussed before on this channel, and that's very, very important, as we'll see. But I've also subtitled this a trauma of life. And if we basically take the trauma is to be born at all into the lower worlds. So that even if you lived in a totally idyllic life and no one was ever mean to you, nobody ever bullied you, nothing ever happened to you, from the moment of birth until basically when you're viewing this video, if nothing ever happened to you, the actual trauma of soul being born in to matter, to this material world, is trauma enough, is possibly the trauma. And all the other traumas basically possibly arise from the trauma. Well, one might say they arise from the scarcity, which is the principal characteristic of these lower worlds, of this world of matter. And so you're born, and it's downhill from then on, basically. I mean, you have a little rise, but after that it's decline until death. And that's life in the lower worlds, basically. So there are various things that we can do about this, obviously. I mean, the trauma of being born at all leads to a certain negative psychological traits, a psychological matrix of negativity, as one might say, of neurosis and even psychosis, and even of cognitive defects of one sort or another, and the inability to deal with emotions in the way that autistic persons have in an extreme way. I think we all share in the autistic problem of dealing with emotions and the reactive mind. So there's definitely things that human beings have thought about this and analysed it for hundreds of years, thousands of years, and especially recently with modern developments in pharmacology and psychology generally. And it's the conclusion basically is that all we can really do is manage symptoms. And we manage symptoms using pharmaceuticals that basically compress the electrical impulses of the brain. So that instead of getting peaks and troughs and extremes of thought, behaviour, and emotion, you get a sort of more kind of sort of nice sort of a wavy line instead of a jagged line, which is caused by a certain cocktail of pharmaceuticals which have that effect more or less. That basically sort of iron out the kinks in our thinking, in our electrical impulses, which basically in the model is, of course, that our thinking, our emotions, and our behaviours are basically all just chemically based, and all you have to do is manage the chemicals in a particular way, and all will be well. But of course, they found that's not really sufficient. And you basically have to have a lot of behaviorist-based therapies, such as cognitive behavior therapy and dialectical behavior therapy. Basically, behaviorism is really just when you reward positive emotions, thoughts, and behaviors, and you ignore the negative. And the effect of rewarding positivity is that it increases the chances of that positivity being repeated. And so you reinforce positivity generally speaking, and you ignore negativity. So you, on balance, you get more positivity than you get negativity through positive reinforcement. And that's basically what all behaviorist therapies are. That's the crux of them, really. They're all just sort of different shades of that particular objective, as it were, which is a bit of an odd way of putting it. Sorry. Anyway, I have an odd way of putting things. But so that's one thing. Now, against that, you have that's sort of regular psychology, and that's what I call management psychology. That's when you're just managing symptoms. You're just keeping the person going, basically. And as I say, you are ironing out the peaks and troughs of their life, so that they don't go off the rails. Either they're too positive or they're too negative. That you're ironing out. You're stopping the bipolar nature of humanness, if you like, and you're reducing that bipolar quality to its minimum. And I mean, that's pretty effective, pretty good. And I'm not here to bash that approach to psychology at all. Personally, I find it very tiring. I find the cognitive side of things too tiring. I can't be bothered to do it. I was never very good at practicing the violin, and I'm not very good practicing thought control or practicing thought awareness and doing all the CBT things you're supposed to do. I feel it's not enough, basically. But I mean, granted, the pharmaceuticals certainly they improve the quality of life greatly, and they enable me personally, and perhaps you as well, to cope with life sufficiently in order to look for alternative ways. So we might talk about this as being the chemical management approach to the problem of being human. And then the other side of it, ostensibly, is the transformational or alchemical, which is basically when you're looking to transform the trauma, which in this case is the trauma of being born at all, and you're trying to go from trauma, I suppose, to reconciliation, and you're trying to go from the child's trauma or the baby's trauma of being born to the adult, the transformed adult, the Homo virtuous, and the adult has a natural propensity to cope with just about everything you throw at it, provided it goes through this transformational process, this alchemical process, whereby the child's reactions to being born are transformed into an adult perspective. One might say a spiritual perspective. And that's certainly the alchemical approach as well. But granted to that, a pin to that approach is a Freudian or Jungian analysis of the problem, which is that we are as yet unaware of the trauma of being born, as well as the other traumas that happen in or around birth, and shortly after birth as well, up to about, let us say, the age of 8 or 9, when other traumas could have been visited upon us, and we don't have any memory of them, so they are locked in the unconscious. So one of the ways of one of the approaches to transformational psychology is to remember those traumas and then bring them into proper perspective, and transform the child's reactions, which you still have on the unconscious level, to the reactions of an adult. So in the words of the King's Speech, Bertie, you're not a 5-year-old anymore. You are your own man. You are the future King of England, and nobody can really do things to you as they did when you were 5 years old. So you have moved on. even though your reactions haven't moved on. So, and Bertie was able to actually think about this and actually understand this was true. But of course, I think that it helps to be the King of England, to be fabulously rich. I think poor people have more of a difficult time in realizing that, because in a way, the things that are being done to them economically by the liberal laissez-faire economy model are basically still abusive. We are still being abused economically, as if we were 5-year-olds. And so basically we have the reaction then of 5-year-olds to the economic abuse that we are suffering as a result of liberal laissez-faire economic models, you see. So that's more difficult. And another problem with the Freudian psychological objective, it only works with people that basically are rich, really, or have sufficient means, let us say. If you don't have sufficient means to survive, then it is almost like you're experiencing the trauma of being born over and over and over again. You're being born naked into this world in an economic environment which is hostile to your very existence, to your very being. You're alienated from your true self by the economic environment. So there is obviously an economic analysis to be done here, as well as a psychological analysis. Psychology cannot be sort of bracketed out of the economic situation of the vast populace. And anyway, so then we go on to the other way of looking at it, which is the psychology of transcendence. So we've looked at chemical management, and we've looked at the possibility of transformational psychology, but also that's linked to the transformation of society as well, which goes hand in hand with that transformational psychology. But transcendence, the ability to meditate and to briefly transcend our human situation, our humanness, and the realization that we are soul trapped in evil matter, and that soul is pure. We go up to a certain level of consciousness during spontaneous introspection, and then when we come down, that has a psychological effect on our mind, body, and spirit. So on a temporary, brief basis, we are able to soar above the lower worlds, if you like, and we are able to take on the consciousness of the hawk and of the dove at the same time, and we sort of attain a consciousness, however briefly, of the Holy Spirit. This has a psychological effect, or psychological effects on us. Of course, it's only brief, and we have to remember the experience, obviously. So we have to have remembrance of the transcendental experience, and very often, again, faced with life's pressures, it's very difficult to remember that psychological experience. So although you can take a holiday from yourself by going into soul awareness, to put it crudely, you have to come back, and everything that goes up falls back to the earth again. Admittedly, you're going up to a higher state of consciousness and emitting light when you descend to the lower state of consciousness, following sort of Planck's law and using Planck's law as a metaphor for psychological states, even though I'm actually talking about, of course, the behavior of electrons around a proton. But never mind about that. And of course, so transcendental experiences do have their place. And of course, the other thing is altruism, is doing things for other people and not for yourself. So one of the ways of dealing with the trauma of being born is to give things to other people, is to give love, resources, time, attention to other sentient beings. And that is a way of has an effect, a positive effect on your psychology. Basically, instead of thinking of yourself all the time, me, you're thinking about other people. But the only problem with that is that very often that can lead you to becoming a doormat for other people's problems, as well as the fact that you are not then, well, the question arises, who cares for the carer? So people care for other people, but who is caring for the person that is giving their energy away? And often you do meet, of course, people called psychic vampires who simply take energy from you. Everything that you give to other people and to society, they go on taking. And indeed, the demiurge is, of course, the psychic vampire supreme, which feeds, of course, on psychic energy, positive and negative psychic energy. So again, basically, we have these four approaches to dealing with the trauma of being alive at all, and I think that it's not a matter of one over the other. I sometimes think very dialectically, in the sense I think, transcendental thinking, meditation is the only answer. Sometimes I think that pharmaceuticals are the only answer, because I am a scientist and a geneticist. So, I am rooted in chemical analysis, materialism, genetics. I appreciate CBT and the power of cognitive behavior therapy and of behavior therapies in general. I think Skinner's findings are fantastic. The basic idea that you reinforce positivity with a positive reinforcer in order to increase the chances or probability of positive reactions. I think it's a brilliant thing that Skinner discovered, and it has huge ramifications for the practice of psychology in the field for decades and decades, and will continue to do so. So his contribution to psychology is immense. Even though, of course, he made a huge lot of errors and mistakes and became very dogmatic and saw the world through the lens of his own theory, of course, like Freud did. So we must criticize Skinner for a lack of scientific thinking in the end. What about altruism? Yes, very, very good, with the caveat that you can give everything you've got to other people and have nothing left for yourself, which really doesn't make much sense at all, and which has repercussions in the future repercussions for the person wrapped up in altruism rather than selfishness. You could say that transcendental experiences, meditation, are somewhat selfish, in that you're sort of cut off from this world, and you're propelling your consciousness out into a transcendent realm, and then you're coming back into this realm, partly transformed, but not sufficiently transformed, I may add, in order for it to make that much difference. And then finally, the alchemical transformation. You take the stuff of this matter, stuff of this world, and you try to create gold out of some of the stuff of this lower world. You try to create gold out of the trauma of being born, and you're transforming a child's reactions to being born, and a baby's reactions to being born, which is to scream and cry, and you're transforming them into an adult's reaction to the trauma of being born at all. So instead of screaming and crying, you are writing poetry and writing music instead, or doing something creative with your time, instead of screaming and crying and taking drugs and fighting people and getting into trouble. And we also saw that Freud, that unconscious analysis is a very good idea. We remember some of the traumas that have happened to us, and we then can confront these traumas, and again transform our reactions to those traumas from a child's reaction to an adult's reaction. You may say that this all begs the question: which one is better? The dogs bark. They have the last laugh. Matter has the last laugh. Matter has the last laugh. Matter has the last laugh. So endeth my sermon.